We might just throw a random fry in the middle. Oh, who's faster? That was good.
This guy on a monkey. So the Ducati was out of action for a little while. I had to adjust the valves. And at 31,000 miles, only one exhaust closing shim was out of spec. The process actually wasn't that bad, and I'll probably post the procedure to YouTube for you guys just so you can see how to do it. Alright. Oh, Mustang Club. So you might recognize this spot from Motorcyclist Magazine. The hosts there, or used to be hosts, Zach and Ari. They did that episode on naked bikes versus sport bikes, and this is one of the spots that they filmed at. And it's the perfect site to talk about the all-time greatest first bike for the new and unsteady rider, which is this. A used Suzuki SV650 produced from 1999 right up to today, with a slightly revised Gladius version thrown in there in the middle for a few years. Now this bike is my buddy Aaron's. Aaron grew up on the same cul-de-sac that I grew up on, along with my buddy Dave. Remember Dave from the Ducati Killer video there? He's the one with the RC51. So why do I recommend that every new rider buy a used SV650 over, say, a new Z400 or an R3, a Honda Rebel, or a KTM 390 Duke? And there are 5 main reasons. Namely, it's cheap with an endless amount of used parts. It has an incredible V-twin engine, it's reliable, it's light and easy to learn on, and it's versatile, being, you know, a cruiser, a sport bike, and a scrambler all rolled into one. So before I expound on each of these virtues, let me give you a quick rap sheet for the SV650. The SV was first produced in 1999 as a Super Naked in response to the Ducati Monster, and sold in both a sport and naked version. However, the sport version, which featured the low clip-on handlebars, a bikini fairing with a windshield, and raised foot pegs, was only initially available in Europe and Canada. In 2007, a fully faired sport version was added to the SV family, which was essentially an S version with the addition of lower side fairings. The first gen SV was carbureted. Now there's nothing wrong with that, but as a new rider you want to minimize your maintenance time as you learn the mechanics of motorcycling. So let's skip ahead to the fuel injected second generation model, which was released in 2003. In 2003, the SV featured a new cast aluminum trellis frame. Personally, I like the looks of the first generation frame, but a cost reduction was the goal here. It also got an improved swing arm, redesigned rear caliper mount, digital speedo and display, new exhaust, and the carbs were ditched in favor of fuel injection. It's this 2003 and onward model I'm going to focus on, namely 2003 up to the last Gladius, which was produced in 2016. And these are going to represent the best bang for the buck motorcycles out there. Interestingly, I think the SV looks more like a Monster now than it did in 1999. It has a near identical tubular trellis frame when compared to the air-cooled Ducati Monster 797. So let's go to the cheat sheet to look at some of the highlights of the SV650. Now through the years there were some minor tweaks to the radiators, the frame, the seat subframe. There was a somewhat major redesign and renamed Gladius revision that happened in 2009. But for the most part, the SV650 formula remained mostly unchanged even to this day. The engine is a 645cc 90-degree dual overhead cam liquid-cooled V-twin. In 2007, it went to a dual spark plug per cylinder arrangement. Output was about 82 horsepower with the crank at 8,800 RPM with a 10,500 RPM red line. Torque was about 52 foot-pounds at 7,200 RPM. Wet weight varies from about 415 to about 437, 440 pounds. Now the specific horsepower, which is the amount of crank horsepower divided by the wet weight, is about 0.18. Anything approaching 0.2 is good. As for handling, it's good for city or urban riding, especially great for twisties and carving up canyon roads. But there is some concern with the lack of good shock control and good damping attenuation in the suspension system. And there are a number of upgrades that you can do to the SV. As far as reliability and known issues, there are some voltage regulator gremlins and some minor stuff with the switchgear on the left side. As far as parts, they've been making these bikes for 20 years, so the number of parts in terms of used aftermarket or even OEM parts are abundant, and they're interchangeable with other Suzuki models, so you won't have any issues there. As far as fanciness, the SV is a pretty basic bike, but there are a ton of upgrades, especially in the aftermarket, to really make your bike stand out. So to summarize, the pros are it's got a really torquey engine, a really great handling flickability. They sound great, especially if you put a set of cans on them. They're cheap, and they get around 50 miles per gallon, so the fuel consumption is really good. As far as cons, again, as I mentioned, the suspension could use an upgrade. I mean, it works fine, but if you're going to really carve up canyons, you're going to want to upgrade the springs and dampers. If you caught my video covering the Woolsey fire... Jeez. Wow. Look at that. All of this was burned out, and it's since been covered with little seedlings. That combined with all the rain we've had an unusually rainy season. So that's provided quite a beautiful, green, lush countryside to ride through. I'm really thankful for that. Look at this pretty flower. Okay, so now that we have some of the details out of the way, why would I choose a used SV over a new Z400 or Rebel 500? First of all, it's cheap. You can pick up an SV with under 10,000 miles for about $2,500 to $3,000 through a private sale like Craigslist or eBay. This is about $1,500 to $2,000 cheaper than a Z400, which will leave you a nice chunk of dough to buy some really good tires. And a high-quality helmet, gloves, an armored racing jacket with a spine protector, and armored pants. I can't emphasize this enough. You're going to go down, so buy some high-quality gear that's going to protect you when you do go down. Now, also, because you didn't pay a lot for the bike, when you do drop it or low-side it around a corner, which you will do, you won't care if it gets banged up. And as I mentioned before, because the bike's been around for 20 years, there are tons of cheap parts, both used, OEM, on the aftermarket, to keep your SV going down the road. From seals and fairings to luggage and suspension. There are even some Gixxer parts that cross over to the SV. The second and most important virtue is that it has that lusty V-twin engine. Unlike the little parallel twin of the Z400 or even the 600cc inline 4s in, say, an R6 or a CBR 600, the SV650's V-twin has a ton of low-end and mid-range power, which means you don't have to shift as much because there's plenty of power in every gear, unlike an inline 4, which you have to keep singing in the revs to get power out of it. The SV650's V-twin power is immediate, and that means less shifting to pass, take corners, to go up hills. Just leave it in third gear here, see how it does. Gotta go around the puddles. Not bad. So that's the nice thing about a twin, is you can just sort of be lazy with your shifting. And that gives you more time to think about learning to ride, which for a new rider can be overwhelming with all the vehicles zipping around you. There's a lot going on when you're first learning to ride. Another advantage to having the SV's low-end torque is the ability to take passengers or haul luggage without, taking a significant hit in acceleration. On a four-cylinder bike, you really feel that added weight to a greater degree than on a V-twin, especially the SV650. So lots of great low-end and mid-range power. The engine has a very linear and predictable power curve, which was really important when you're learning throttle control on a motorcycle. Throttle control is everything when you're riding, so to have a nice linear power output is really important.
That's funny, because I still can't get a continuous roll on.
That's SR1. Rolling out of and on and off the throttle when you shouldn't.
That's right. Survivor reactions. How could I forget that?
The third virtue which makes the SV a great first bike is its reliability. As I mentioned before, that Suzuki 90-degree V-twin is a bulletproof engine that's seen 20 years of continual improvement. And most of the repair issues are pretty minor, low-cost items, as I mentioned before, the voltage rectifier and some of the switchgear. Fourth is they're easy to learn on because they're light, weighing between 415 and 430-ish, 440 pounds. The older ones are lighter, the newer ones are heavier. It also has a low center of gravity due to the V engine configuration, which drops that front cylinder close to the ground. This means the bike is, easy to flick and toss around while riding and fairly easy to pick up when you drop it. As a footnote, generally anything under 450 pounds is considered a light bike. Yeah, there are bikes that are lighter. You know, if you want to get a Z400, that's only 368 pounds. But generally, a 450 pound bike is fine, it's especially for beginner rider. Once you get around to 500 pounds wet, then the bike is getting a little bit too cumbersome. It's hard to pick up, it's harder to maneuver. And finally, the last reason I recommend the SV650 to new riders is it's versatile. Its comfortable seating and good sized frame make it comfortable enough to cruise on with passengers or luggage. Yet it's, light and compact enough to make it easy to carve twisty canyons. And again, that somewhat compliant suspension that works against you on the twisty roads complements you when you're going off-road. So for secondary or access road travel, for the occasional camping trip or adventure ride, the suspension actually works fairly well. So, there you have it. 5 reasons why the SV650 is the all-time greatest bike for the new and unsteady rider. See you later.